So tonight we have a very, really awesome, in my opinion, talk. This is a subject, intimacy, love, sexuality, that oftentimes gets disregarded with spiritual practices and sometimes gets misconstrued and kind of even veiled within different spiritual practices. And it's very hard to find a modality, a mind frame that sticks to a place of pure connection when it comes to intimacy and sex. And I feel it is incredibly valuable information, incredibly valuable wisdom to have in this world, not just with our intimate partners, but with all relationships we hold in our lives. Sharp, frank, and fearless, Cheryl Fraser, PhD, is a Buddhist psychologist and sought-after relationship expert. She has helped thousands of couples jumpstart their love life and create passion that lasts a lifetime. A highly successful and awarded Fulbright scholar, she has conducted extensive research on sexual behavior and what causes love relationships to succeed or to fail. A former talk radio host, Cheryl is a dynamic guest expert for television and radio. She appears on multiple programs, including The Experts, CBC Marketplace, Air America, and Loving Well podcast, many more as well. Her approach to life and helping others is based in her practice of meditation and Buddhism, which she has studied for 25 years in both the Tibetan and the Theravadan traditions. She was given permission to teach by her root teacher, and excuse me if I pronounce this wrong, Namgyal Rinpoche. How do you say that?
Namgyal Rinpoche? Good try.
Namgyal Rinpoche.
Yeah.
Thank you. And she is a resident meditation teacher for Island Dharma. Her work is encapsulated in the teachings of mindful loving, where she brings the Buddhist teachings into the bedroom. And without further ado, let's warmly welcome Cheryl Fraser.
Thank you, Biddy. Thank you. Well, welcome. I'd actually like to begin by showing up. So I'll begin in a fairly traditional way for Buddha Dharma, which is I'll set an intention or an aspiration. And then I'll just take us through a couple minutes of settling practice and then into the, I hope, fun and provocative and interesting discussion for this evening. So setting an aspiration in the tradition of Buddha Dharma, that is essentially setting an intention. You can think of it like a compass reading. If there's somewhere we want to get to, it makes a great deal of sense to get some clarity on where it is we want to end up. And at the beginning of a Buddha Dharma class or even a meditation, it's tremendously helpful and generally done to set that intention. So I'll set a very simple one. You can join in if you wish. For the sake of all beings, ourself and others, near and far, may we cultivate a peaceful mind and a happy heart. May we uncover the passion and the compassion that resides under our clouds of confusion. And just for a moment before we launch into a lot of words, how about we share a little bit of quiet? Just, if you wish, closing your eyes to your own comfort level, leave them open if you wish, and just finding yourself showing up. The body's in the room here at Banyen this evening, which is a beautiful place to be, but the mind may not yet have joined us. It might be in the past or planning the future, as in, oh no, how will the roads be later? Whatever the mind's doing is fine. But just taking a moment to feel the body in the chair. Perhaps grounding into your feet on the floor or against the chair, just taking that as a grounding. And this is an invitation to the mind to join your body in the present moment, so to speak. The invitation may be accepted or declined, but the invitation is to gather our thoughts and bring them present here in this good company, in this great place this evening. I will just share about a minute or two of silence, just breathing and feeling your body in the chair, or touching the floor. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. So the Buddha ruined love songs for me. And the more we study the workings of the mind and the workings of reality, spoiler alert, it may ruin love songs for you as well. But the good news swiftly follows, because there's a lot more to love and passion and connection than what perhaps we learned from love songs. And I'd like you to participate a little bit this evening, nothing too scary, but I'd like you for the moment to think of a love song that you like or used to hum. Think of a song, any genre, ideally with lyrics. And can you tell me a song, a love song that you like or used to listen to?
I'm leaving on a jet plane.
I'm leaving on a jet plane. There's suffering in a line.
I don't know when I'll be back again.
Beautiful example of a love song that's all about longing and about clinging and about losing and about suffering, right? Thank you very much. Another one.
She keeps me warm.
She keeps me warm. What's the rest of the lyric? Do you know off the top of your
I
head?
don't know. I just see the person singing it.
Oh, beautiful. She keeps me warm. That one's not too bad. It doesn't sound like it has suffering built right into it the way so many of them do. Love me tender, love me something, never let me go. Uh-oh, we're in trouble. Any of you who know anything about the basic teachings of Buddhism, clinging is suffering. Hanging on is bound to not work out well in the long run. Now, that does not mean in any way, shape, or form that love itself is bad, that loving depth relationship is inherently problematic. It's no more problematic than anything else we do in our human life. And it's only problematic if we cling and we're confused about the nature of reality. So what I propose to do in the next short while here is I'm going to talk a little bit about the Buddha part of Buddha's bedroom, and then I'm going to talk about the bedroom part of Buddha's bedroom. So why do I say the Buddha ruined love songs for me? Well, perhaps like many of us as a kid, and maybe far older than a kid, I believe that love was the answer. And that essentially I would find happily ever after through a profound and unusual and extra special love relationship. It started out very young. When I was around 6 years old, it was Donny Osmond and puppy love that was the love of my life that set my childhood heart on fire. And as I got a little older and a little more refined in my tastes, it became Sean Cassidy. And I was completely sure that Sean Cassidy, the pop singer, for those of you who are too young to know this, the pop singer Sean Cassidy, who was also in the Hardy Boys. He played the Hardy Boys on television. Very cute boy detective. I was convinced Sean Cassidy was my soulmate and that he would come. It turns out he wasn't, spoiler alert, but that he would come and rescue me from my dull existence in a logging town on Vancouver Island. Love Vancouver Island, love my logging town, but I was meant for better things, namely to be passionately in love with Sean Cassidy and tour the world with him. And the amount of longing I had, although I tease my young self now, was visceral. It was erotic, it was romantic, it was absolutely consuming. I was desperately obsessed with this fantasy. I would write these long stories, these erotic love stories. It's really embarrassing, and I'm really glad the internet didn't exist back then, or probably they'd still be searchable by y'all, and that would, not necessarily make me look good. But there was tremendous passion and longing, and therefore tremendous pain, because the longing wasn't delivered. I didn't get the object of affection. So I continued, believe it or not, I was a pretty weird kid, and well, we could probably believe that part, but I really wanted to understand what made us happy forever. Why weren't we happier? It's like probably the majority of us in this room. I was very blessed to grow up in Canada in a reasonably middle-class lifestyle. The water I drank wouldn't kill me. I wasn't bombed when I left the house. I didn't live in a war-torn or a very dangerous area. Extremely blessed. And I looked around and I did notice that people weren't all that happy. We were relatively happy, with our work and our lives and our good health and our good food. But it seemed like people weren't thriving with a type of profound happiness or contentment or depth that I intuitively thought might be possible for us human beings. So I was on a search from a pretty young age that took me all sorts of places that we could talk about another time. But in a more traditional sense, it took me into the study of psychology and couples therapy, 12 years in university and 3 degrees, and I had the pleasure to study with some of the very best. And I was looking for an answer. I didn't know really what the question was back then, but the question was a very simple question. The question was, why do we suffer? And perhaps a nuance of that was, why do we suffer in our love relationships? But psychology couldn't give me a succinct answer. It gave me very complex answers and valuable answers. I still do practice psychology and psychotherapy. I don't think it's a pointless art, but it didn't put its finger on the root of the problem. And then I heard the Dharma, the teachings of Buddhism. For those of you unfamiliar with some of these words, Dharma essentially means the teachings of the Buddha. The Buddha means the awake one, or the one who has seen the truth of reality. And I heard for the first time the absolute simplicity of the answer to the question, why do we suffer? And the Buddha taught this in the Four Noble Truths. Some of you are probably quite familiar with these, and others perhaps not at all. So I'll summarize them briefly here. The Four Noble Truths, or what we can call the 4 facts of life, or the 4 facts of life and love, as I like to weave them in when I talk about this teaching applied to love and romantic and sexual relationships, are fairly simple and can be profoundly life-altering. The first truth is the truth of impermanence, or the truth of change. Now, this one is pretty hard to dispute, and I love these teachings because we can use our intellect and our scientific skepticism and our brains, and no one's asking us to believe anything on faith. They're saying, apply this to your life and see what you discover. And I think all of us have discovered that the first truth is true. Everything's impermanent. Everything changes. Everything in time comes to an end. Today was a great example. We had certain plans, the weather changed, it changed plans, etc. So often we forget the truth of change, but it's not going to stop changing. Reality is going to do what it's going to do, regardless of whether or not we fall in line and salute. The first truth, according to the Buddha, is the truth of everything changing. Think about this in your love relationship. What if your partner has made you that perfect latte every morning for the last 15 or 16 years, and then today they didn't? Something changed. What then happens next is up to your mind, not up to your partner and their lackadaisical latte skills this morning. It's what your mind does with that truth that's going to determine your happiness or your suffering. But I'll circle back around to that. First truth, things change. The law of averages and our own life experience teach us that when things change, sometimes we find those changes favorable. If we go out tonight and someone's left a bouquet of flowers on our car, that feels like a favorable change. If we go out tonight and someone's left a bag of dog poop on our car, that feels like an unfavorable change. We like some changes. Dharma's very serious, you know. Very, very serious. Not where my teachers come from. Dharma's about joy and passion. So I'm glad that you are laughing at my perhaps irreverencies. If there's dog poop on the car, we don't like that change. Why am I saying that? Because we like some change, we don't like others. This is the nature of the way things are. Second truth, sometimes we suffer. And we suffer because we cling to something very simple and fairly logical, except it doesn't work. We cling to wanting change that we like. We cling to wanting things to go the way we want them to be. We cling to wanting something other than what's present. Here's a terrific prescription for unhappiness. Want something other than what you've got. It's that simple. If you want to be unhappy, want something other than what's actually happening. Right? If we don't want the snow, we're in a little bit of suffering. Now, suffering is a pretty heavy word. It's a translation of the Pali word from Buddhism, dukkha. And perhaps a more favorable translation for some teachings is unsatisfactory, as opposed to suffering. A lot of us think of suffering as big, the cancer, the death, the rape, the Holocaust, the big sufferings. And of course the word applies to that. But it also applies to the small little niggling unsatisfactorinesses in our life. Snow when we'd prefer not to have snow. No latte when we were expecting and wanting a latte. So when I use the word suffering, please hear all those small little minuscule sufferings as well as the big ones. First truth, there's change. We don't like all of it. Second truth, if we cling to wanting things to be a certain way, we will suffer or find it unsatisfactory. This is very apparent in our own minds and our own hearts, so I won't belabor it right now. We'll circle back a little bit. The third truth, because the Buddha was a great physician, so to speak. He gave us the explanation for the sickness. He told us the cause of our sickness. He told us the cure of our sickness, I'm about to reveal. And then he gave us a prescription. So the sickness is, we're sometimes unhappy in life. We're sometimes unhappy in love. We're sometimes unhappy in our head because things don't always change the way we want. The cause of our unhappiness is clinging, or we can call it control. We can call it micromanaging. When we don't accept reality as it is, we have some discomfort. The cure is then pretty simple. If the cause is we're hanging on to things, what's the cure? Letting go. We make it sound so easy, and it's easy conceptually. We all find that an easy concept, and I think most of us agree with it. That if I'm holding on to a hot coal, famous little analogy used by the Buddha, it's burning my hand. There's pain, there's suffering, there's distress. And so often we find ourselves clinging tighter to that coal. I'm hurting. Why am I hurting? I can't stop hurting. We've got to let go. If we let go of trying to fight reality, our hand might still be burned. There might still be some pain, but we've stopped the continuing of the pain. We are no longer responsible through our clinging fist at hanging on to the pain and creating more damage. We let go, things can start to heal. We can be with it as it is. That hurt, but I'm not increasing it. That is the cure. The cause is clinging, the cure is letting go. This is all going to relate to love and sex very soon. And the fourth truth is the prescription, because let's face it, if all of us could let go of our wish for things to be different right now, and this is a quote from, I think, Bodhidharma, but I'm not sure about that. And it's very simple. Cease all clinging and enlightenment will arise. If we could stop clinging to wanting things to be different, if we could entirely stop clinging in this very moment, we would be fully awake Buddhas, fully awake human beings. Ready, go. Yeah, for me, I'm not there yet. For me, I still find myself clinging, fighting reality, not wanting it to be what it is. And when I catch it, I can loosen my grip, I can calm that wish for something other than what it is. And sometimes the mind and the body come into alignment with the truth of what is, and there is peace, there is grace, and there is equanimity. But because for most of us that's difficult to do at all times, instead of just leaving us out there flapping in the wind, the Buddha gave us the prescription. He gave us the eightfold path. I won't go into that in a great amount of detail tonight, but essentially it's a prescription of 8 teachings that we can use to train our mind, our body, our actions, our speech, some meditation. Think of it as 8 pieces of a pie, that if we were to cultivate these 8 factors of ourself, we're strong in some, perhaps weak in others, we could cling far less, suffer far less, and liberate far more joy and peacefulness and a robust sense of being alive in the world with compassion, wisdom, and for those of you immersed in these teachings to some degree, a realization of the nature of emptiness and the nature of reality. That is a template for life. Look at where we're fighting reality. Look where we're not happy. Why am I not happy? What is my expectation in this moment? In what way is it not being met? What am I hanging on to? And what can I let go of? Well, I'm having trouble, I'm stuck. Then here's 8 trainings. Change your view, work with your intention, your action, your livelihood, your speech, your effort, your mindfulness, and your concentration. Those are the 8. And you can start to liberate a happier mind and a more peaceful heart. A brief introduction to some profound teachings of how to be happy. The Buddha taught one thing: suffering and the cessation of suffering. And how did he ruin love songs? By pointing out that when we want to be happy ever after, we're hanging on to something that's impossible. That doesn't mean we can't be happy ever after, oddly enough, but not because we're looking for that happiness outside of ourselves. In a piece of chocolate, in the perfect job, in a new car, in love, in a soulmate. Do you know that the soulmate concept comes from, it's either Socrates or Aristotle? If one of you knows, please correct me. I think Socrates. And the idea was that we're half of a person on this world, that we're up in heaven or somewhere in the cosmos. There's this spirit being that's split into two. It's a soul split into two, and it's plunked down to earth, and you're one half and I'm one half. And therefore, out there in this big old world, because until tonight we've never met, is your other half of your soul, wandering blindly, bereft and alone, no doubt. And it's incomplete. It's half of a human until it meets you and you become one soul. I used to love that idea. Now I find it super yucky. That there's half of you wandering, and you've got a 1 in 22 billion chance of finding her and being complete. Well, there's a few things wrong with that formula from a Buddha Dharma perspective. One is, even if I find this blessed being, what's your name? Marcel, and we are lucky enough to find each other and fall madly in love, one of us is going to die before the other one, most likely. Impermanence is going to come and bite our happiness and eat our happiness. So I'm very sorry to say I'm here to kill the soulmate forever. And if you're hanging on to that myth, I want to just get rid of it entirely so you can be freed up to actually create an astounding romantic and sexual relationship with a real live person who's definitely not your soulmate. They're just a regular, imperfect, lovely human being ready to stumble through life and potentially try to figure it out with you and beside you, which to me is far more profound and romantic and moving than, oh, there you are, I've been waiting, you're my other half. Instead, wow, let's try to co-create something that's extraordinary. So there's a bit of a tour through the Buddha part of Buddha's bedroom. Now the bedroom part, and why I brought them together. To cut to the chase, why would I add the teachings of Buddhism and the teachings of meditation and mindfulness to a book about sex and love and creating a profoundly amazing love relationship? Quite simply because they work. And this isn't just my opinion or something I've drawn out of the ether. There's a tremendous body of research now. I won't go into a lot of it tonight, but I'll refer to a little bit of it, because a lot of the great research in sexuality and mindfulness is coming out of UBC and the lab here locally. We can be very proud, world-renowned researchers here in town. I teach them together because they work, and I've done a lot of traditional couples therapy as a therapist and also as a consumer, and the mind we bring to love is what we need to work on. So let me just switch over and teach you what I call the passion triangle. The book is laid out in the following way. I take the Eightfold Path of the Buddha, view, intention, action, livelihood, and speech, effort, mindfulness, and concentration. And I have a chapter on each. There's 8 chapters. And under each one, I apply that particular teaching to love, sex, and relationship. And I use the other structure that I've developed to teach people about how to have an incredible, passionate relationship. And I call it the passion triangle. I hope it's a pithy, easy way to remember the 3 keys to a sustainable, lifelong love and passionate relationship. What I mean by passion here is sexual and erotic passion. I mean mental, emotional passion, feeling in love, feeling interested, curious, delighted with each other. I mean the profundity of just enjoying reading books together in silence with your toes touching. I mean all of it. I think passion should be a large capital P. And when we talk about passion for life, passion for being alive, I'm referring to it that way. The 3 keys to passion, and this is drawn from sex therapy research and marriage therapy research, my own clinic work, and etc., just to ground it in something substantial for you. I talk about the 3 keys to passion being thrill, intimacy, and sensuality. And the book's split into those thirds. Thrill, intimacy, and sensuality. Let me define those both a little bit, and then I'll do a bit of teaching on them, give you a few ideas for how to play with them. Thrill. Almost all of us are familiar with the feeling of butterflies in the stomach, falling in love, that thrilling feeling where you feel this sort of like there's effervescent soda water in your body when you look at them or think about them, or you're feeling pretty obsessed about checking your messages and seeing whether they called. And you can let yourself off the hook there. Falling in love mimics the biochemistry of obsessive compulsive disorder in the brain. There's been some great new research to show that obsessive thinking, right? That is both juicy and wonderful and also a little out of control. Obsessively thinking, thrilled, you're at your desk in the middle of the work day and maybe you're having a new wonderful dating relationship and you feel a thrill of lust move through your body. You're kind of horny at your desk and it's really a bit untoward. And you kind of go, whew, and you go back to typing your analytic report or whatever it is. The body is charged, the biochemistry is supercharged, and we've got lust and projection and all sorts of fabulous things going on. That's the easy early thrill that many of us have experienced in relationships, perhaps in the relationship we're in now, in the earlier days. This is not a scientific statistic I'm about to quote, so allow me to preface it that way in full integrity. But I would say that the best anecdotal and observational evidence seem to indicate that the thrill phase for the majority of us in relationship lasts about 3 to 18 months, somewhere in there. And then this thrill naturally tends to wind down. By the way, there's reasons for that. The biochemistry of falling in love is based in our animal body and brain wanting to possess a mate, and that's a very useful thing. But when you've possessed the mate, the biochemistry changes and it settles out to a more contentment, cave decorating sort of phase, and nesting and raising the bairns and whatnot. And so it is a very natural thing. Unless we do something about it with our Buddha mind, it's a very natural thing for the thrill to wane. I'm going to come back to that. Please come join us if you like. Don't all look at her. Just, there's nobody here. There you go. So that's thrill, and I'll come back to that a little bit. Intimacy, here I'm not using the word intimacy as a euphemism for sexuality the way a lot of people do. I call sexuality sexuality. I'm a sex therapist. Here I mean intimacy in the more psychological, emotional, even spiritual form of all that quality of knowing and being known, feeling like someone has your back, that they care deeply about you. We start to build that type of intimacy early in a decent dating relationship. We ask each other lots of questions. We're intrigued. Where did you grow up? Who was your best friend? Do you ask those questions anymore? If you're in a long-term relationship, if not, you can begin again. But intimacy is the entire spectrum of that breadth and depth of getting to know someone. Very much over time, we tend to share or expose our vulnerabilities, our crunchy bits, our issues, our abandonment fears, our stuff, our psychological junk comes out very intensely for a lot of us in a deep love relationship, especially a deep love and sexual relationship. So intimacy is a profound part of sustainable lifelong passion. Intimacy is something that a lot of long-term couples are fairly good at in the long term, but they can usually refresh it and learn to get curious with their intimacy. I'll return to that in a little bit. And then sensuality. So we've got thrill, intimacy, and sensuality. When I use the word sensuality, I mean the entire spectrum of anything sexual, sensual, and erotic. Everything from eye contact and a smile with someone you're intrigued with or you're in love with, through holding hands, through cuddling, through kissing, and through the entire spectrum of erotic and sexual pleasure. Everything from a romantic, sweet, sort of soul-shaking, moving sort of lovemaking to the wildest, most taboo, hot, crazy explorations, which interestingly a lot of us explore early in the dating relationship when the thrill is still hot and the intimacy's building, and often that part of us gets minimized or settles or arguably gets cut off in longer-term relationship. And I'm here to say that it's possible to revive and uncover what used to be there. So that's the passion triangle. I hope a lovely and a pithy way to remember 3 keys to depth, profound, intimate relationship. 3 aspects each of us can cultivate. If you're single and you move into a relationship in the future, you can cultivate those 3 aspects with a new partner. If you're in a relationship now, I invite you, you don't have to share this information, this is for your mind only, but take a moment and think about your current or your last relationship, if you're not currently in a romantic relationship, and say, where would you rate yourself on each of those 3 sides of the passion triangle? For thrill, 0 to 10, 10 being very high thrill, 0 being, are you kidding? I would much rather watch cat videos than ever talk to that person. Where are you on the thrill spectrum? And think about that. If you're early days in making your love affair happen, you probably have lots and lots of thrill. You might be a 9 or a 10. If you're a rare long-term couple, you might have thrill that has lasted a long time. Probably it needs some reviving. Probably it needs a little bit of help. The good news is it can be helped. And then rate in your mind your level currently of intimacy in your relationship. And here I mean emotional, psychological, or spiritual connectedness. Do you feel like your partner knows you extremely well these days? Are they aware of what's bothering you at work? Are they aware of what you're looking forward to next week? Are they aware of changes? You used to love sushi, but you got sick on it last year on that business trip. Do they know you no longer like sushi? That may sound like a trivial point, and it's not really. It's a point of listening, it's a point of connecting, it's a point of knowing who your partner's evolving into and realizing, just like the First Noble Truth teaches us, your partner also will change. He or she will evolve. And a lot of us forget that. And we forget that this person we think we know so well is an almost unknowable mystery. Any of us who think we know our long-term partner extremely well, you've forgotten how to look. And this, I don't want to be negative here, but I do like to be realistic. This is generally the root cause of a majority of emotional or sexual affairs, is we forgot to be interested and really know the person we're with, and someone new found them fascinating. Someone new asked them questions and listened like it really mattered what they had to say. And that is profoundly tempting and can be profoundly confusing. So intimacy, if you were to rate your current or your previous relationship on that intimacy spectrum, from 0 being no intimacy, I feel like we're strangers, I feel we're very disconnected, I don't feel like they've kept up with me at all. I don't feel like my mate knows who I am in my depth, or even in my trivialities these days. Or 10, really feel known, feel deeply known, and like our partner renews and refreshes and says, so tell me about your day. What happened today? What was one challenge? What was one unique thing that happened? And then think for yourself sensuality, 0 to 10. Where are you currently on that? And of course it might be a range, your good week, your bad week. For some couples, their sensuality is very low after the first lust and fun, and sexuality is kind of waned after that magical 3 to 18-month phase for a lot of us. Others have a natural sensuality and sexual connection that maintains. That's very rare. I would say maybe 5 to 10% of long-term couples have a natural, I'm going to speak a little bit graphically here to be clear, a natural horniness or lust or attraction for each other that continues. And then there are couples who cultivate their sexual life. But I would put forward that a great proportion, probably the majority, meaning more than 50% here, of long-term couples have a pretty low score on their sensuality side of their triangle. They are either are not sexual. A lot of what's called a sexless relationship is a little or no sexual contact for 2 years. I work with all sorts of couples of all sorts of ages and genders who have essentially sexless relationships. They don't want to break up. They don't. They haven't stopped loving each other, but they have something that I call in the book marriage incorporated. They're running their relationship like a business. And I don't mean coldly. I mean, they're running it really well. They pick up the kids, they tag team, I drop off so-and-so at hockey. It's a Canadian talk after all. In the States, I guess I'll have to say soccer or something. But they drop off one kid at hockey, I tag team, you drop off so-and-so at dance lessons. We get the groceries, we manage to get enough kale into everybody. We have to sneak it into the spaghetti sauce for the kids. But we get it done. And we fall into bed at 11 or 11:30 at night, absolutely shattered with fatigue. And then somebody, out of a sense of duty or guilt, says, should we? And you're like, or we could watch Netflix. And Netflix wins because of fatigue, because of marriage incorporated, because of forgetting thrill, intimacy, and sensuality. Forgetting that the key to profound sex and love is actually all in your head. So you've rated yourself on that passion triangle. The beautiful thing about all those ratings is they can all change. They can all be cultivated. We can put time in. And here's where some people start to get a little bit squidgy. Because they say, oh no, I have to work on my relationship. She's going to tell me to work on my relationship. Well, spoiler alert, you kind of have to work on something if it matters to you. Everything else we're good at, everything else we value, we spend some time and energy on, right? Think of your career. Think of your cooking. If you value cooking, you spend time on it. Think of your fitness routine. And I want to put something out because I don't want to work on my relationship either. It just kind of makes us deflate when we hear that. We work a lot at work. And even if we hopefully have work we enjoy, we don't want to come home and work all over again. So let me switch that concept a little bit. Why is it work? Why can't it be play? Why can't you make your love life a hobby? This is a very simple mind flip that I encourage each of you to take, and I'll just help you with it a tiny little bit here. And then don't worry, we're going to get on to the sex part. So how would you make your love life a hobby? Help me out here. What are a few qualities that a hobby has? Like literally, if something's a hobby, what does that mean?
Fun.
It's fun?
You do it often.
You do it often?
Something to enjoy.
Something to enjoy?
You like doing it.
You like doing it?
You find out about it. Lots of things.
Exactly, you find out about it, lots of things you explore, you maybe read, you come to Banyen and get a book on your hobby, how to make green smoothies, the best way ever. And you learn. It's such a simple idea, a hobby, isn't it? We don't get paid for it. We don't have to do it. We do it because it matters to us. We're intrigued, we are curious, and we carve out time, we make it a priority, we learn, we grow, we train to become a better cook. We hire a golf pro so we become better at our golf swing. Make your love and passionate life a hobby. This is a simple shift in perspective that can open things up and make you fall in love over and over with the one you're with. Let me review just for a moment, and then I'll move into some teachings on some things you can actually do. So from the Buddha's perspective, happiness or unhappiness is in the mind. We're happy or unhappy based on our reaction to the event, not the event itself. So let's say, I'm sure this never happens to any of you, and it certainly never happens in my household, but let's say your spouse promised to bring home something from the store, cat food. We have a couple of cats. Let's say the spouse said, I'll get cat food. Let's say you went that extra mile and you actually texted them to remind them about the cat food. And they said, yeah, no problem, I'm going to swing by the store on the way home. And you're happily go about your day and your responsibilities, and then here comes your sweetheart through the door, and you're thrilled to see them, and they're thrilled to see you. And you say, and did you get the cat food? And they go, wait, I forgot. What then happens? What then happens is entirely up to your mind. It's got nothing to do with the cat food. It's got nothing to do with your seemingly errant spouse. It's got to do with what you do with your mind in that moment. Truth number one, things change. They don't always change in the way we want. I wanted cat food. I want a responsible spouse who listens to me. I want someone I can count on. I want to not be the only person around here who takes care of everything. Whatever the story is, we want something other than what is, which is there's no cat food and there's 2 cats. But there's probably tuna in the pantry. And you have a choice in that moment to choose love and train your mind away from suffering and towards freedom from suffering, which is the fundamental teaching of the Buddha. Suffering and the cessation of suffering. That's it. Namche Rinpoche, my root teacher, used to say, if it's not on about suffering and the cessation of suffering, it's not Buddha Dharma. So when we're looking at love, when we're looking at sexuality, when we're looking at how to be happy and passionate in love, we want to look at, is my choice creating suffering or is it moving away from suffering? And that, my friends, is in our mind. We can try really hard. I've tried to change the person you love. Anybody else tried that ever? How's that working for you? Goodness, I'm a psychologist, I'm a sex therapist, I'm a bonked on the head Buddhist teacher. I should be really good at manipulating my partner to be exactly the way I want him or her to be, right? I've been trying, people, and I'm a stubborn, determined woman. I have not yet been able to shape reality to be exactly the way I want it. And Sean Cassidy still hasn't called, by the way. So it doesn't always go the way we want, and we can suffer. And I make light of suffering, and I don't mean to make light of suffering, because I suffer and you suffer. And the thing that got me so interested in this work all those years ago as a child was, why do we suffer so much in love? When we find someone, really a decent, lovely, good-looking, fabulous person who makes the incredible choice to walk through life with us, why aren't we happily ever after? And the answer is, it's up here. Now, just to be clear, I'm of course not talking about overt abuse, drug addiction, alcoholism, dysfunctional patterns. Those things need work. Those things need all sorts of work. I'm not saying whatever's going on, it's all up to your mind to make you happy. But I am saying, fundamentally, even in the worst of circumstances, our dearly beloved child is dying of leukemia. Our friend's been killed in a car accident. Even in the worst losses and the worst sufferings, it is still our mind's reaction to this truth of reality that determines whether we're okay or not so okay. So now let me switch a little bit and give you a few teachings to, if you want to apply them right away in your relationship, in the passion triangle, from applying the teachings of the mind to your love and sexual life. I'll briefly talk a little bit about thrill, and briefly a little bit about intimacy, and then a bit more about sensuality. So in terms of thrill, I've alluded to this a little bit, but whether or not your partner's interesting is all in your head. If you're bored with your mate, there's absolutely nothing wrong with your mate. It's your mind that is bored. And I referred to this when I talked about the sad, very frequent occasion of affairs, where you are bored and not paying attention to your mate, and someone else finds them fascinating, treats them as though they're fascinating. It creates a sense of thrill that can lead to stepping outside of a commitment in an emotional and or a sexual way. How can you fall in love all over again with one you're with? You can create novelty here and now. We just did it for a moment or two when we meditated at the beginning of this talk. We showed up now in this moment. We attempted to invite the mind to be here now, not out in the snow or elsewhere, and we experienced actually this moment as it was. If you can do that with your mate, you get to say, hello, fascinating person, who are you in this moment? And actually uncover the curiosity that is still there under Marriage Incorporated. Marriage Incorporated is a state of mind and a state of love boredom. Complacency and settling for what we have and not investing life and passion in the hobby of our love affair can lead to a pretty boring relationship. But you're not boring and neither is your mate. You need to bring the minds out of boredom and uncover the shine under the clouds. I'm going to divert for a moment there and explain that comment because it's a really important one. In Buddha Dharma, the assumption and the finding, and you'll touch this in meditation yourself, is that underneath the clouds of our confused emotions, our negativities, our fears, our angers, our discontentments, our sadnesses, is the shining sun of awake mind. And it's a beautiful metaphor because if you think of, today's a fantastic example, whatever the weather's doing, the sun is radiantly shining. It's untouched. We don't say today was sunny. We say it was cloudy, it was snowing. But the sun is untouched, people. It's up there shining, doing its sun thing, absolutely untouched. Our experience is simply that there's clouds between us and the sun. That's all. Your happy mind and your passion and your love are the same thing. They're always present. Passion doesn't die. It sure feels dead, but it doesn't die. Interest doesn't die. Your mind and your heart are available to be passionate and interested and bright and alive in this very moment. They're just covered up by Marriage Incorporated, by boredom, by laziness, by the difficulties of life, by fatigue, and by familiarity. All of those things in a heartbeat can be changed. Unfortunately, I do a lot of post-affair work with couples, and an affair is a very dramatic, painful, awful way to wake up and find your partner interesting again. How about if we wake up before that and say, look at this fascinating person. I've known you for 37 years, and there's so much more to learn in your depths. So in terms of thrill, there's teachings and some exercises in the book. Something I referred to a little earlier, something as simple as asking each other fascinating questions. Go out for a cup of tea or coffee, go out to your favorite place for appies, and Google up really interesting questions to ask people, or there's a list of 10 or 20 in the book in one of the exercises, and some of them are silly and some of them are deep, but something like, if we won a contest and you were allowed to choose 3 vacation homes anywhere in the world, what would you choose and why? That's a pretty good conversation starter. I did that with my sweetheart the other day, and I was surprised by one of his answers. I learned something. And then there could be questions that are more personal, more deep. What is one sexual thing you fantasize about that you'd like to try sometime? That's a pretty scary question for some people, a very easy one for others. But in terms of thrill, the thrill can be uncovered, like the sun will be revealed at some point as the weather shifts, as the darkness lifts. It is always present. Passion is always present, which is why you could fall madly in love with someone new if Sean Cassidy, or insert your person here, walked in and swept you off your feet. Oh, I thought I was dead inside. I didn't know I had the capacity to feel this level of lust, this level of passion, this level of curiosity. I'm dying to know all about you. It's because you possess it all the time. So, tough little teaching here. Sorry, folks, don't throw eggs or anything. It's up to you to find your partner fascinating. It's not up to them to become fascinating. Dang it. If the other worked, I would teach it, but it doesn't. I teach reality. And reality says how I approach this makes it fascinating. Couple of little teachings on thrill. Intimacy. This is a big section because this is the psychological, spiritual, knowing, being known, trust. I won't spend a great deal of time on it tonight, but I'll just give you a few clues. One of the ways to build intimacy is to be more careful with our speech. The Buddha taught right speech, to talk in a way that is kind, meaningful, timely, honest, accurate, and has value. How well do you do in your marriage speaking that way all the time? I mess up a lot. I use a lot of words, not all of them are kind, not all of them are wise. And so I have a number of teachings in the book around communication exercises, mindful apology. What's a really good mindful apology look like? Hint, it's not, I'm sorry. That's not a bad start. It's not a bad start. But a mindful apology has 3 aspects, and it takes 3 aspects from the receiver. So if I'm going to apologize, I want to first own my mistake. I want to apologize for it and vow to do better. This is very much drawn from Buddha Dharma in the Tibetan side, Vajrasattva practice, any of you familiar with that. But purifying our lacks, our sins, our difficulties, our screwed upnesses, purifying that and vowing to do better. That doesn't mean we won't fail and falter and fall again, and then we pick ourselves up, and what do? We own it. We apologize, we vow to do better. I've got a beautiful exercise in there on that. But I also point out that the Buddha taught that generosity has to be a two-way street. This is a great teaching. It really opened my eyes up when I learned it. I thought generosity, in the English word, was to give, right? To be a generous person, to be of giving to other people. The Buddha teaches very clearly that dana, the Pali word that's translated to generosity, is about giving and receiving. If you're not a good receiver, you're not a generous person. Wow, that was quite earth-shattering for me. And it made me think of an example when I was in my first year of university. I had some scholarships and things, and I could mostly cover my costs, but I needed some money. And my dad said, I'm happy to give you some money, Cheryl. And so I think I asked him for $1,500. And he came down to, I was at UVic at the time, he came down and he came for lunch. He was quite a good, happy mood, and he gave me a check. And I did this elaborate apologizing for needing the money. I said, I feel so terrible and I wish I didn't have to ask, and I thought I had enough and I'm just a bit short. And I did this big song and dance that I, in my confusion, thought was kind of gracious, that I was making sure he didn't feel taken for granted. And he stopped and he looked and he said, I was feeling really good about helping you out and you're making me feel awful. And it caught me up short. And I didn't really understand what it was all about till years later. I got the Buddhist teaching on receiving. And no one can be generous to us if we can't receive with grace. So mindful apology is not just I have wronged you. I own it, I make my repair, and I vow to do better. But there needs to be an equal profoundness from the wounded party in the relationship. To see the compassion, to see my friend is hurting because they've acted or spoken in a way that wasn't skillful. And they've got the grace and the depth and the guts to own it, apologize, and vow to do better. So the receiver accepts it, acknowledges it, and thanks the person in a heartfelt way. It's a very simple thing I've just described, but imagine if we brought that kind of intention to our intimate life. And there's numerous other communication things that I cover in there as well. Some might be familiar and some might be new. But I want to move on to the unique part of the teachings that I have done my utmost with whatever limited skill and training I have so far, that I hope to get more and become better and wiser, to bring to our sense of depth and passionate relationship, which is the teachings in the book around sexuality and sensuality, the third side of the passion triangle. And there's a lot to cover here, and our time is short, so I want to think how to best share this with you. Actually, what I'm going to do is a brief little exercise that some of you will have done before. Leo, do you mind? Leo's just going to hand out raisins. Some of you will have done the raisin meditation. I've put them out, and all hygienic. You can just take 1 or 2 raisins, and you don't have to touch the others, so no one has to worry about germs. Practicalities matter, you know. Take 1 or 2 raisins, don't eat them, just put them in your palm. And I'll set this up and we'll go through this little exercise together. So much of our life we rush through never experiencing what's actually happening. And many of us rush through our sex life never experiencing what's actually happening. So while we wait for the raisins to go around, I'm going to give you a few perhaps surprising statistics about the typical sexual life. Are you aware that the typical sexual encounter lasts an average of 5 to 7 minutes? And I'm talking the whole thing, from the elbow in the ribs to, phew, we're done now. The entire thing, 5 to 7 minutes. I think we're a bunch of underachievers, and we can do much, much better than that. Talk about rushing through something instead of enjoying it. And another few fun facts for Banyen tonight. The average male orgasm lasts 7 seconds. The average female orgasm lasts 22 seconds. Yay, women, high five, 3 times longer, but it's often a lot harder to get there. These are not stellar numbers. That's a pretty puny amount of pleasure in the big picture. If you should so desire to take on the trainings of the mind, the trainings of mindfulness, the training of showing up and really experiencing the sensuality and depth of your body, of your senses, of your mind, when your mind is deeply focused on this encounter, on this kiss, on this touch, you can develop over time can be called many things, but a style of an orgasm we can call a tantric orgasm, or an extended orgasm, or multiple orgasms for men and for women. I'll talk a little bit more about that tonight if I can. If not, you can come ask me after or read about it, etc., because it's fascinating and we should all be intrigued with this. But I tend to characterize the typical North American sex life. I'm sure this applies elsewhere, but I'm more familiar with North American people because that's who I tend to teach and do therapy with. Here's the typical North American sex life. Are you ready? Nipple, nipple, crotch, good night. That's it. It's a routine. It's 5 to 7 minutes long. We do our dance that is the same as usual because we're being complacent. We're in marriage incorporated. We're not bringing mindfulness and curiosity and depth and breadth to this beautiful encounter. So let's practice a little bit of depth and breadth. This is a very familiar little meditation. I believe John Kabat-Zinn first started it about 30 years ago. Some of you will have done it, but it bears repeating. And I invite you all to take a look at the raisin or raisins in your hand. And spend a moment really looking. Maybe for the first time, at a raisin. And take your finger and maybe roll it around. You might want to close your eyes and see if you can note any textures or even a warmth or a coolness, both in the palm and in the finger touching or rolling the raisin. And then I invite you to pick up one raisin and bring it up to your nostrils and breathe in the scent. See how much or how little. With a bit of focus, a bit of attention, a little bit of slowing down. How much aroma in a single raisin? And in a moment, I'm going to ask you to place it on your tongue. but don't bite down. So when you're ready, place the raisin on your tongue, and then you can close your lips if you wish, and just let it sit there stationary for a few seconds. And notice what happens. You can close your eyes if you wish. And then without biting, please, you can start rolling the raisin around in your mouth and noticing any flavor, any texture. Just bare noticing, paying attention to sensation, be that touch, scent, taste, hearing, or visual. And when you're ready, place the raisin between your teeth without yet biting down, maybe your back molars, wherever it's comfy. Notice what's happening in the mind and body. And when you're ready, bite down a single bite. Noticing flavor, and then slowly and mindfully chew, and if you wish, when you're ready, swallow your raisin. Now, just enjoy whatever your direct experience is showing you. Now, what did you notice? Let's hear from a couple of people. They're like, no, Cheryl, we're mindfully eating our raisin. Don't rush us. Yes. The sweetness of the raisin. A single raisin, right? Yeah. What did anybody else notice?
How complete the process was.
How complete the process was. Interesting. By slowing down, bringing direct experience, being less distracted.
And totally
Focused on the experience. Fantastic. Was anybody a little bit surprised how much flavor's in a single raisin? Yes. I mean, think of the times we've eaten fistfuls of raisins, right? Probably put 15 or 20 in one handful, gulp. And I don't know that I'd ever really tasted a raisin till I did that lovely, elegant little exercise. Thank you for playing along. Now, you might guess what I'm going to say next. What would it be like to kiss like that? Right. What would it be like to have someone gently stroke their fingers along the inside of your thigh like that? Oh, it's getting a little warm in here. The simplicity of bringing attention and concentration and slowing down and experiencing the vastness of our sensory body is all you did with a raisin. You just slowed down for about 2 or 3 minutes. You focused a little bit. You allowed yourself to discover what is the texture, what are the ripples, the grooves of this raisin, what is the flavor. When I bite down a single time, whoa, it's like a mouth orgasm. The first time I did that, I was stunned at the intensity of the sensory experience. Now, most of us have experienced that in a sexual or sensual encounter, particularly when it was earlier days with someone. Remember, perhaps for some of us, certainly for me, my adolescent love affair where we weren't going to have sex yet, so there was sort of nothing happening below the waist. But we would make out, and I don't know why we called it necking back then. I never understood then, and I still don't understand why it was called necking. It seems that's fallen out of favor, and I'm glad, because it's a really dumb phrase. But we would neck for hours, my adolescent boyfriend and I, on this black and red couch in my parents' rec room for like 2 hours, and our entire sensual, sexual lust, orgasmic energy was focused basically from the chin up. And it was the most entrancing, intense, erotic, charged, horny, beautiful, connected feeling, almost, that I've ever had. Not quite, because I practice this stuff. but profoundly erotic. Why? Because of the concentration, because of the slowing down, because of the world just went away and it's just you and me and this moment. Now, fast forwarding to Marriage Incorporated, and maybe I'll call it Bed Incorporated. 5 to 7 minutes, nipple, nipple, crotch, good night. If we have sex at all, because we're generally too tired and we'd rather watch Netflix, because we don't prioritize passion, we don't make our love affair important enough. Some of us do. This is not a finger-wagging lecture. It's a call to action. If we're being complacent, if we're being lazy, it's a call to action in your next relationship, if you're not in one now, to say sexuality matters. It's one of the most profound, beautiful experiences. Eat your lover like that raisin, at least now and then, and bring the 7 factors of enlightenment. I've got a chapter where I apply the 7 factors of enlightenment to sex in very specific ways. If you're not familiar with those, I don't have time to teach them in detail, but let me name them. Mindfulness, something most of you have heard of and practice or are familiar with to some degree, is only one of 7 factors of enlightenment. I really like to teach this teaching because mindfulness alone is not a full experience of the mind. The other 6 factors are curiosity. Curiosity of the mind. If you're a meditator, instead of just being with the breath or practicing tantra or whatever your practices are, what happens when we bring curiosity to the breath? It brightens the mind, it brightens the meditation, it increases the energy in the body. What happens when you bring curiosity to your sexual and sensual life? Explore new things, get curious about what might turn each other on. Invite some of the taboo energy that often we split off from our primary love relationship into fantasy, into extracurricular curiosities, into other places. We don't bring the taboo into now. That's curiosity, mindfulness and curiosity. Energy, enthusiasm, or diligence is the translation of the 3rd factor of enlightenment in the mind. These are meditative factors and they can be sexuality factors where we make some effort, diligence, energy. We stimulate the energy in our mind as we meditate. We stimulate the energy in our lovemaking, in our sexual commitment to each other. Then we've got tranquility. In a way, these are matched pairs. We've got excitement and enthusiasm and energy. We've got tranquility, cultivating the tranquil touch, the tranquil connection. Post-orgasm, I have an exercise there. It's very simple. I'll describe it right now. Post-orgasm, can you just rest in the tranquility of this moment, allowing your hearts to settle down, allowing your breathing to settle down instead of rushing on to the next thing. Oh, I've got to get a cloth and clean up the wet spot. I'm being straightforward because we need to be straightforward when we talk about sex. What about just staying in the imperfect perfection of just you and I, just snuggling, just being, allowing the tranquility of mind. We've got mindfulness, curiosity, we've got energy and enthusiasm, we've got tranquility, we've got bliss or pleasure, piti, the beauty of the mind and the body in lovemaking, and we've got equanimity, which is being okay with things as they are, and we've got concentration. I'll talk a little bit about concentration in a moment, then we'll have a little bit of Q&A, and then I will bring things to a close. Equanimity is being okay with good enough sex. I don't want to mislead and make it sound like I'm saying your sex should always be transcendent and multi-orgasmic and like the best raisin ever. Sexuality is a dynamic flow of energy and choice and mind and hang-ups and hopes and dreams and boredom and recreation and all sorts of stuff. Equanimity is a beautiful state of mind taught in meditation and a beautiful thing to bring to the world, and it relates back to those noble truths. Equanimity is being with things as they are, not clinging and wanting them to be different, not pushing them away because they're not working out so well. Sexuality isn't a perfect thing. There'll be times where our bodies don't cooperate, our minds don't cooperate, or our partner won't cooperate. And that's where equanimity comes in. Can we look for what my colleague, the wonderful writer and sex researcher Barry McCarthy, and he's got multiple books, and in one of his books, he talks about good enough sex as a model for non-goal-oriented lovemaking, which is equanimity, which is, can we just be with this touch in this moment, not necessarily needing it to go anywhere, not directing it in any way, just being with the sexual energy and allowing it to guide us. So I wanted to mention that. And then concentration. Concentration is the 7th factor of awakening, the 7th factor of enlightened sex, and I then dedicate the final chapter entirely to how to use concentrated meditative awareness for transcendent sexual experience. This is where we get into tantric lovemaking, we get into full body orgasms, not those 7-second and 21-second things, which are still fabulous, don't get me wrong, I'm all for a good traditional climax, no problem there. But how about adding to the spectrum of sensuality? Imagine that your sensual spectrum is as large as the world's largest paint store. Every single conceivable shade of color. I don't know how many that would be, tens of thousands or something. A lot of us have limited our sexual spectrum to kind of the colors of the rainbow. We've got our few things we do and the few things we explore. What if on occasion we explored what I'm talking about? In terms of a tantric or a full body orgasm, it's an energetic type of orgasm. Bit difficult to describe in really quick terms, but I'll try. If you think of the usual sexual orgasm as what I'm going to call a traditional climax, the sexual response cycle, originally coined by Masters and Johnsons way back in the day, in the 50s, the early sex researchers, talks about the fact that our bodies go through a period of arousal, and then a period of plateau, and then an orgasm, and then a period of resolution. I'm not going to go into that a bunch right now because I want to get to the point. That's a typical climax orgasm. We start making love or masturbating or being turned on in whatever way. We start to get aroused. There may be a plateau where we stay at sort of medium arousal and make love for a while or play for a while. Then an orgasm in this typical encounter, arguably not typical, but we'll leave that for now. And then we're finished. There's a resolution phase. A full body orgasm, instead of this brief, very intense orgasm, through working with breath, through working with concentration, remember, necking on that couch for 2 hours, you were locked and loaded with the sensual energy. Through working that way, you can learn to draw the energy through your body with some tantric sexual practices and other breath practices, and just with the concentration of your mind, slowing down, being in equanimity with this just now, and expand that sense of orgasm. Imagine the greatest bliss orgasm you've had in a traditional climax way, but feeling that sort of pleasure through your entire body, that your fingers were orgasming, your nose was orgasming, your toes were orgasming. This is not some esoteric strangeness. This is very possible should you bring concentration and patience and exploration to your sensual life, either solo or with your partner. That's also true for extended orgasms, where the waves of orgasms can last much, much longer than the few seconds they usually do. And for what would potentially, there's different terms for these, and I'm trying not to get too into heavy-duty Tibetan stuff, but what could be called a non-climax orgasm, where you don't have that traditional pow, but it's like you recirculate the energy. And a lot of this is taught in Taoist sexual yoga and other techniques as well. The one I'm personally familiar with is from the Tibetan tantric practices, but where you recirculate that orgasmic energy through your body so it doesn't go out, so to speak, in a climax orgasm and for men in ejaculation, but that pleasure and bliss and joy and mind energy is recycled to a state of physical bliss and joy and mental bliss and joy. And ultimately, for those of you who study these teachings, a realization of the nature of emptiness. And bliss, emptiness conjoined to a state of temporary or maybe eventually permanent enlightenment. So on the basic level, sex can be a lot more fun if you concentrate. Your just connection with each other. Couple of things, and then I'll bring this to a bit of a Q&A and then a close out of respect for our time. I would love to spend hours and hours with you. Maybe I will another time, but at least a taste for tonight. When you're a sex therapist, every word sounds dirty, so like taste came out of my mouth. I'm like, sounds like a sexual innuendo. It's a cross I have to bear. So there's a little bit about concentration and tantric orgasm and tantric energy. And don't forget, it doesn't have to involve genitals or anything else. I want you all, just for a moment, to close your eyes and with one hand, just gently stroke the back of your other hand. and notice. Just so. The amount of intensity, if we bring a little bit of focused attention to that touch. It's possible for all of us. So the Buddha part of Buddha's bedroom is it's in our mind to create passion, to create intention, to look at how we view our partner. Are they this terrible person who didn't bring home cat food and we can never trust again? Or are they this lovely, imperfect person who's willing to put up with us and that's fantastic? How do we bring this to the passion triangle of thrill, intimacy, and sensuality? How do we bring things alive? How do we fall in love over and over again with the one we're with? And I have a little story I'd like to tell you about that in a moment. But first, just for a few moments, if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to attempt to answer them. Yes.
I felt interested when you talked about how people in their early stages of relationship are
Yes.
really in lust, and I cannot relate to that at all because I can only feel attracted to someone once there is an intimacy, an emotional intimacy.
Beautiful.
Great. Yeah,
So if you didn't hear that, she said she was puzzled by the teaching that a lot of people in early love feel a lot of lust because this beautiful being, what's your name? Jezebel, said she doesn't feel lust for someone until she feels intimately, emotionally attracted to them. Fantastic. That's beautifully said and beautifully put, and it's true for a lot of people. There's no order this has to go in. Probably what you may have experienced is a combination of what I would call thrill and intimacy, like excitement about the person and that getting to know them and falling in love with them, and then the sensuality piece comes later. When you've got that thrill and intimacy, which I would say is a reasonably common way in for some people. Others lead with lust, but I would suggest in that case it's a fairly ungrounded lust because there's almost no intimacy and almost no knowledge. And then it just is what it is. It generally doesn't sustain for very long.
That has been my thoughts for a long time. A lot of people mock me for that.
To hell with them.
I was just wondering what...
I'll never mock you for that. It's beautiful. It was my way into sexuality as well, is it always came for me with intimacy and both. But then what some people, and I hope not you, find is that they have an overemphasis in time on intimacy and they find it hard to bring kind of taboo, crazy, lusty sex in because they're over intimate. And so that's where we want to look at the triangle and having strength, ups and downs in all three of these.
But if you're afraid of bringing something up, then you're not as intimate as you think you are.
Yes. Oh, I love this girl. She said, if you're afraid to bring something up, like perhaps a sexual question, then you're not as intimate as you think you are. You don't even need to read the book. But you still should, because you'll learn some pretty good tricks. Exactly. The profound, passionate relationship has reasonably strong all three sides. Because if you are deeply close and intimate, you should be able, even if it's scary, even if it's vulnerable, even if it feels way out of our comfort zone, to say, I want to talk to you about my deepest lusts, my deepest needs, my taboos, things I'm ashamed of, things I'm frightened of, because that is sensuality and intimacy brought together. And that's where the dynamic, sustainable, long-term, remarkable sexual and love affairs can be created. Created, note, created, not accidentally. Co-created, even better. Right, it's not you find great love. Love isn't an accident. It's a created phenomenon, and it takes mindfulness and hobby and love and the kind of dedication you folks seem to have by coming out this evening. Any other burning questions?
Can I ask a question?
Oh, go for it.
Hello? It's nice if we have this on for the camera as well. Yeah, I have a question about the early start of relationships. So,
Yes.
like with that excitement and thrill phase, how to, like, from a place of mindfulness, how to be in relationship to the thrill without
Right.
being thrown off balance.
Right.
And also on the other extreme, not denying thrill. So like, what are ways that, you feel to...
So you're in love, are you? That's okay. We don't need to go there in a public forum. It's a fantastic question. And what I often say is enjoy the hell out of the roller coaster ride, but know that you're on a roller coaster. So know that I'm in lust, I'm in love, I'm in thrill. It's nuts. My biochemistry is wonky. My serotonin and dopamine are going crazy. I'm horny as hell. I'm projecting all over you that you're going to make me happy forever. Even though I know you can't and I believe you can't, it's still happening. I'm on a roller coaster and it's delightful. It's one of the great joys of life is to be on that roller coaster. Enjoy the hell out of it and just gently remind yourself, without dumping ice water on it, that I am on a roller coaster. And it's a great, great ride. But at some point it's going to pull into the station and I won't be on this same roller coaster anymore. And then the question is, do we become serial roller coaster jumpers? Or do we maybe say, you're amazing, and the roller coaster's really settled down. I don't have as much thrill, and I'm not quite as sure. Do we then move into what I'm talking about, which is cultivating that, creating thrill again, finding ways to surprise each other, be astounding, go find new roller coasters together and that sort of thing. So the mindfulness is in seeing reality. That's what the Buddha taught. And reality is I'm in an altered mental physiological state called falling in love or lust or craziness. And that's okay. And I can be with it with equanimity, enjoy the hell out of it, but don't cling. When we cling to wanting it to last and it starts to almost invariably settle, shift, and change, because thrill thrives on novelty, and novelty only lasts for so long, that's where we can apply these teachings and say, now I'm going to create novelty again and again and again by surprising this person, by showing up in a new way, by uncovering the depths that I've yet to even begin to know about them. Does that help at all?
Yeah, that's really brilliant. Yeah.
Good.
Allow yourself to feel it, but know the impermanence
Yeah,
of it. So,
yeah.
cool.
And then you can fully enjoy it, like the raisin. The raisin's going to be gone in a few moments. But I can fully and deeply appreciate every nuance of this gorgeous raisin right now, even though I know it can't last. That's being fully dynamically awake in the moment. That's what the Buddha said. And he was way smarter than me. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Just in the interest of time and respect for your time, I think I'll just tell a little story, bring things to a close. I'm very happy to stay a bit, until the bookstore kicks me out, and answer any questions one-on-one, or anyone who'd like to chat. I'd be just very happy to do that. Leo, you wanted to hand out those cards. Leo's going to hand out some cards for anyone who's interested. A lot of people ask me about working with me in my private practice, etc., which has no space in it. But I will be debuting later this year an 8-week online course for couples, which I'll be doing weekly coaching and Q&As and whatnot, and some people might be interested in that. If you're interested, you can have $200 off if you fill out the card tonight. A great reason to fill out the card if you have zero interest in the course, which is completely fine, is every week I send out a teaching about this, about mindful loving, about Buddha's bedroom, about passion. About half the time they're short videos, 3 to 5 minutes long. Sometimes it's an article I write. And if you want to sign up, we'll put you on the list to receive those. You, of course, can unsubscribe with one click, but a lot of people do really enjoy learning more about this. And I teach new material and try to keep things fresh and to help people as much as I can. I want to close with a story, a very personal story from my own life about a couple who taught me that the thrill does indeed last forever. And this is a story about my grandparents, Norm and Evelyn Fraser. So my granddad Norm was born in Wales, and his dad was a physician in a Welsh coal mining town. And my granddad wasn't good at school, so his basic chance for life was to go down the coal mines and probably die as a young man of the black lung. So instead, he escaped his town in Wales, so to speak, and lied about his age, jumped on a boat to Canada. He ended up, as so many young men did, riding the trains out to the prairies, and he got work at a farmer's farm. I think he made something like $1 a week, whatever would have been fair back then. And Norman was a very hard worker, and he was very happy for the work. And then spring came, and the great event of the year was the spring dance. So my granddad went to this dance, and as he tells it and as I picture it, he was leaning against the wall with the other young men, and they were watching the girls come in with, their handmade dresses they would have probably spent all winter sewing, with their flowers and their beautiful colors and pastels. And my granddad was watching, pretty girl after pretty girl after pretty girl. And then my grandmother walked in, and he turned to the guy next to him and he said, who is that? And they said, that's Evelyn, but don't even think about it. He said, why not? And they said, because she's engaged to be married. And my granddad said famously, not for long. So he wooed her and he wed her. And I was very lucky. I grew up in Duncan, and both sets of my grandparents lived in Duncan, and all of my grandparents lived to a very ripe age. So I grew up with my grandparents in my life. Sunday dinners, everything else, they were around. And they were a tremendous example of love. Every time my granny walked in the room, my granddad Norman, he lit up like a Christmas tree. I never heard him use a harsh word. He adored her, he honored her, they delighted in each other. In their older years, they got an RV and they took their Siamese cat and they went RVing everywhere and to square dance festivals, and they lived passion. And then in their 80s, my grandmother got sick very quickly, and she died within a couple of months from cancer. And after she died, we discovered that my granddad had Alzheimer's, and it was reasonably far along. And the reason we didn't know is they were such a matched set that she finished his sentences, she anticipated his gaps, and she filled them in, and none of us had any idea. So after his dear Evie died, my granddad went downhill very quickly. He was very strong, robust in his 80s, so his body kept going, but his mind was pretty close to gone. And as he lay in the care facility, eventually we had to take him to, I was able to go visit him a lot because it was very close to where I lived, just 20 minutes away. And one day, I went in to see him, and he looked up at me. And my grandmother, Evie, as a young woman, had wavy blonde hair and these beautiful blue eyes, the color of the ocean, he used to say. And I walked in, and I was about 30 or so, and I had wavy blonde hair and blue eyes. And my granddad looked up at me, and he just lit up like a Christmas tree. And he said, Evie, you're here. And then, thanks to mindfulness, I said the right thing. And I said, yes, Norman, I'm here. How are you, my love? And he just smiled, and he closed his eyes, and he slept, and he was so peaceful. That's how I know the thrill can last forever. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming out. It's been just lovely to sit with you.
Thank you.